Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode on Introduction to World Religions. Today, we'll take a look at the Jewish ethics. And in this way, we see that Jewish ethics, in a way, are deeply rooted in the belief that God is the ultimate source, and also He is the standard of moral behavior. Now, the goal of Jewish ethical teachings is to bring individuals closer to God. Now, this coming closer to God happens through acts of justice, compassion, and kindness, which also helps to make a better society based on divine principles. So, let's take a look at some of the core ideas that are there in Jewish ethics. First is nearness of God through compassion. So, Judaism emphasizes that humans are never closer to God than when they respond to the needs of others with love and sympathy. So, this means that caring for others, especially the marginalized and the vulnerable, is not just a moral duty, but it is also a way to connect with God. And therefore, we see that compassionate actions reflect the presence of God in everyday life. Next is pursuing justice and mercy. We see that Jewish ethics stresses on justice and mercy, and these justice and mercy are in a way seen as central components of moral life. So these are not just abstract virtues, but they are practical obligations that are meant to shape personal relationships and also shape society as a whole. Now, Jews are taught that God's will for them is to act justly towards others. And this basically ensures fairness and equity while also showing mercy and understanding. Next is social responsibility. We see that Jewish ethics extend beyond individual behavior to also the broader social order. So, therefore, tradition teaches that individuals should contribute to the betterment of the society, and in this way, they have to work for the creation of a just and merciful world. So, this includes advocating for the poor, then protecting the weak, and also promoting peace and justice. Next is the sanction from God. So we see that Jewish ethics derive their authority from God, who is the creator and master of life. Now, since God is the source of all morality, ethical behavior is seen as an obligation to follow God's will. So, this means that ethical standards are not just arbitrary, or they are not just human constructs, but they are based on divine command, as well as on the natural order that is established by God. Then you also have the hallowing of life. We see that Jewish ethics also emphasizes the sanctification of life. This means that all aspects of life, okay, whether it be individual, social, and communal, should be lived in a way that reflects holiness. And therefore, ethical behavior is a way of making every action sacred. And therefore, this helps to align human life with God's will. And at the same time, it helps to align the human with the covenant that in a way also binds God to the Jewish people. Next, you have imitating God's attributes. So we see that the rabbis thought that the goal of human life is to resemble God as much as possible within the human limitations that we have. And this teaching is summoned in the Talmudic directive, which says, just as God is gracious, be thou gracious. Just as he is compassionate, be thou compassionate. Just as he is called holy, be thou holy. And therefore, this principle, also known as the imitatio Dei, or the imitation of Christ, or imitation of God, means that human beings are to embody God's qualities and his virtues in their actions. For example, just as God is compassionate, we also are expected to be compassionate towards one another. And therefore, holiness is not something that is defined only through rituals, or it is not only restricted or confined to religious rituals, but it is something that should be reflected in everyday interactions and also in a ethical behavior. Now, when we speak about ethical relationships with others, this is basically based on the golden rule, that is, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, we see that Jewish ethics emphasize that ethical behavior is not just about my personal relationship with God, but it is also how I treat others. And therefore, the golden rule of loving neighbor as yourself this in a way encapsulates the whole idea that human relationships in a way should be governed by respect, love, and fairness. And therefore, treating others well is seen as a direct reflection of one's relationship with God. Now let's take a look at the concept of life and death in Judaism. Now we see that the whole concept of life and death in Judaism is complex, with the primary focus on ethical behavior during life rather than a detailed description of the afterlife. So, first and foremost, you have focus on actions over beliefs. So, here we see that Judaism emphasizes that action in this world over speculation about the next. So, what you do in this world is important, and therefore, you need not worry about what will happen afterwards. Just live in the present and do your duties in the present. And therefore, the primary concern is in Jewish teaching is fulfilling one's duty to God and also caring for fellow human beings. So, while life after death is not ignored, it is not the central focus, unlike some other religious traditions. Next, you have the Messiah and the Messianic age. So, we see that one of the key beliefs that is tied to life after death is the coming of the Messiah. So, Jews believe that the Messiah would be a descendant of King David, and he will come to rule forever, bringing peace and the restoration of Israel. So, the Messiah is expected to establish a perfect social order and also usher in a period of universal harmony. And therefore, this age is often referred to as the Messianic age. And this will basically include the resurrection of the dead, where the righteous will rise and Israel restored to its glory. Then you also have the concept of Olam Haba, the world to come. Now, this in a way refers to both the afterlife as well as the Messianic age, and it symbolizes the world after the coming of the Messiah, which will be a time of peace and justice. And therefore, this age will be marked by the resurrection of the righteous and the renewal of Israel. So, Olam Haba can also be referred to as the soul's existence after death, where the righteous are rewarded. Now, there are also the views on death and Sheol. So, here we see that according to the Torah, death is seen as a return to one's ancestors. So, this indicates a reunion with those who have passed before. Now, death is also described as a return to the dust. And therefore, we see that here Sheol is depicted as a kind of a place of darkness. So, the whole concept of Sheol, okay, is in a way kind of a shadowy, silent place where the dead dwell. And this in a way reflects the early belief in an afterlife. Now, Sheol, as we see, is depicted as a place of darkness where the soul exists in some form, but it is without the notions of reward and punishment that we find in later Jewish thought. Then you also have the whole concept of judgment Gan Eden, and Gehinnom. So Judaism teaches that there will be a day of judgment where the dead will be divided into two groups based on their earthly deeds. So the righteous will be rewarded and they will have eternal life in Gan Eden, that is heaven, which will be a place of peace and communion with God. Next, we see that the wicked will be punished in Gehinnom, that is hell. And we see that Gehinnom is not an eternal place of torment like the Christian idea of hell, but it is a kind of a temporary purification process for most souls that last up to 12 months. Then you also have the concept of the immortality of the soul. So although Judaism is more focused on communal and ethical living, there is also an underlying belief on the immortality of the soul. So we see that even though the details are not the central concern of Jewish sacred texts, the idea that souls continue to exist after death is present. And therefore, the soul's fate depends on its conduct during life, reflecting the belief in divine justice. So, that's it for this concept of the whole concept of Jewish ethics. So, and with this, we also wind up a whole teaching on Judaism. So thank you and see you next time for another religion. Thank you.